Right. So this should be recording. Yeah, I think it is recording. So I'm going to go ahead and start in on this. And this is a very straightforward card called the vertical easel card. And you can see how it gets the vertical easel card, because if you imagine this as the typical card that we've done with easels before, you know, usually they lie like this so that the bumper or the stopper is on the bottom of the card and they stand up this way. Well, for a vertical easel card, you're actually going to stand it up vertically, and the bumper keeps that fold from opening horizontally. And it is so cool. It is the coolest thing. I know it's hard to see this on camera, which is why I have this one kind of facing down, but it literally will stand on its own. And when it stands up, it is absolutely gorgeous. So that's part of the, when you send this to someone and they open it, and we'll talk in a couple minutes of how to make sure they know how to set up the card. Part of it is the, oh my goodness, that is so cool. And then the second, oh my goodness, that is so cool, is this front piece, because it is really not attached in a way that you can see how it's attached by looking straight down. It's not mystical or magical. They're little tabs that you use to attach it. And we're going to go through and we're going to look at those. But it is just the most fun kind of card. And I'll be honest, every once in a while, cards like this with different kinds of designs absolutely capture my attention. And this one is one of my favorites in a long time. It's just really fun.
So Lori, mine really lends itself more to the other direction, and I can do exactly the same thing, but just have my attachment, my flower. It's not that, but have it going the other way, right?
You can, Brenda, what you will see is if you do it this way, you know, if you look at this flower on the top, it's going to be flat.
Yeah, I don't have a flower, so.
Okay. But okay, yeah, you can do that. And I'll just,
okay,
I'll show you how you can pop it up this way.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So let's just do this. It's much easier to just do it and show you by putting one together. The cards that I used to do the examples that I sent out were actually cards that I had from a paper pumpkin kit. And I think that it was a lot of fun for me to be able to use those because they were already pre-scored. But I'm going to recreate the card using a piece of black cardstock. Obviously, any colored card base works really well. This is cut to 5.5 by 8.5, which we all know is the standard size for an A2 card. I've scored it right down the middle at 4.25, and I'm just going to give that a good burnish because I do want to make sure that this is going to lay nice and flat when I put it into the envelope. And then the other score that you're going to need to do, let me bring the example back in. You're going to need to score the front of the card, and it's going to fold up toward you. It's right at the halfway point. So doing a little bit of math, don't roll your eyes. This is 4.25 wide. So halfway is going to be 2 1/8. And you will notice that I broke down and I bought the Stampin' Up! Paper trimmer. I've been toying with this for a while. My trimmer was getting a little bit rough, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to see what I think about this.
And do you love it as much as the people who have it do?
I love it. It's nice. It's very convenient. It works really well. I like the fact that it has the cutting blade that goes way off to the side. So there's no way that you're going to, you know, get into anything that you shouldn't be. And then the separate scoring blade down at the bottom. Yeah, Brenda, I really do like it. I think it works really well. So all I've done is I just put a score line at my 2 1/8 inch And notice that I'm folding in the same direction, meaning folding in the same direction as that halfway point. I want this to fold toward me. So I'm just going to give that a little burnish as well. That's all that needs to be done for the card base. It's really pretty straightforward. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to make our panels. And the panel pieces are for this card, white cardstock and some designer series paper. And because on the front we have two areas, we're going to put the same paper on both sides and actually create kind of two backgrounds. We're going to need to have the same dimensions on both halves. And for me, the way that I created this is I put a white frame in the back. I'll bring the example back in. So I've got a white frame in the back, and then I put designer series paper on top of that. And you know me, I like to have a little bit of a border around the edge just so I can see the different layers and different colors. So again, a little math, bear with me. I promise this isn't horrible. If you remember, this width is 2 1/8. I wanted to make my white a little bit thinner. So I decided to cut that at 2 inches wide, and that gives me a little bit of a border on each side. The height of this is 5 1/2. Well, if you take 1/8 of an inch off 5 1/2, you get 5 3/8. And I did that because I wanted to have the same border around all four sides. So I cut out two pieces of white cardstock, each 2 inches by 5 3/8. And all I'm going to do to those is simply adhere them straight down to the front of the card. And what I like about cards like this is chances are that you have some scrap paper in your stash that probably is the dimension that you need for these pieces. And it's a great way to use up scrap. I have a ton of white scrap paper because I tend to make a lot of white bases, and then I'll add on some pieces in the front of cards, and inevitably I end up with a little bit of scrap. And one thing I do suggest too is that you fold that card front, and visually that's going to give you a little bit better way to make sure that as best as you can, you get that piece of cardstock kind of centered on that panel. And I'm just going to do the same for the other side. Nothing mystical or magical about this at all. And then the next layer, what we're going to do is we're going to, or at least I'm going to use designer series paper. You can use anything you want. If you want to put another layer of cardstock, maybe you want to use some of the double embossed pieces that you've made to give it some really cool dimension. That would look really, really nice on this kind of card. But again, I just want to kind of talk about measurements. So the white piece we said was 2 inches by 5 3/8. I wanted to make the same border for my designer series paper so that I would see as much white around the designer series paper as I did black around the white. Well, if I made my white piece 1/8 of an inch skinnier than the panel, then I'm going to make my designer series paper 1/8 of an inch skinnier than the white, which means that the designer series paper is 1 7/8 inch wide. And then the same thing on the height, the designer series paper is going to be 5 1/4. So again, that designer series paper, and this was in the email that I sent, but it's 1 7/8 inch wide and 5 1/4 long. And I'm going to go ahead and cut some because I'm thinking that this kind of background would also look really pretty with this particular design. So I'm going over to, actually, I'm going to cut this. Yeah, I'll do it this way. I'm going to cut this to 1 7/8 wide. And one more. And if you have designer series paper that has a pattern and it really matters if that pattern is, you know, the right way up, like flowers, if you want the petals to go right way up, just make sure that you've got everything oriented in your trimmer before you cut. And the length on these is going to be 5 1/4. So again, it's 1 7/8 by 5 1/4. And that will help give us the same amount of frame around the designer series paper and around, for me, the white that I have in the background. And if I had two pieces that were of the same piece, like these two, I would try to orient them in the same way. And I'm just going to, just like it did on the white, I'm going to go ahead and adhere those to the front of the card. As you're doing this and as you're thinking about the designer series paper or whatever it is that you are going to put on top of your panels, you may want to consider the focal point piece. For me, it's going to be a hydrangea. But if you've got something super busy that you're going to put on your focal point, you may not want to have super, super busy designs in the background that will compete. Maybe you want a sentiment, make it kind of simple. A nice happy birthday would look really fun. You can do anything in terms of how you decorate the front. So I am just going to put these down and do my best, not really saying mean things about myself if it's not perfect, but try and get those panels on as best as I can. So right now, what we have done is we have created our card base, standard A2. The only difference is that score line on the front at 2 1/8, and it's a mountain fold. The fold is coming up toward us. We've created our panels, and we've got a 2-layer panel. The bottom piece is 2 inches by 5 3/8. The top piece, which for me is designer series paper, is 1 7/8 by 5 1/4. What I'm going to do before I go any further is I am just going to pop in, for me, a piece of white cardstock on the middle. And if you're using a lighter color card base, you may not need to put this in, but I'm just going to go ahead and add in a piece of cardstock that is going to end up being the place where the greeting would be written on the left-hand side. If you want to wait and maybe stamp this with whatever your focal point stamp will be, hold it out. This is 4 1/4 by 5 3/8. It's actually 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. I apologize because it is a little bit skinnier than half the paper. So it's 4 1/8 by 5 3/4. And again, it's purposely done to that size. So you have a little bit of a border going all the way around the inside of your card. All right. What we have left to do is we're going to have our focal point, and then we're going to build the bumper or the stopper or whatever you want that to be. And let's focus first on the focal point. And what I decided to do on this is I wanted to use a pretty large shape, and again, to have some concentric colors, and I mimicked the colors that I used on the framing on the front. So the back color is black and the front color is white. And what I chose to use to make those are a few of the dies from the stitched nested labels dies. These are really nice. And I used the largest one and then the second largest one. And as you can see, when you use those dies, they not only cut out the shapes, but just like the other stitched dies, they leave a really nice pattern on the outside. So what I have done is I have cut out two pieces, one as my background, which I again did in black cardstock. And then I cut out a smaller piece in white. And I played around with what I wanted my design on the top to be. And I decided that I really, really liked the hydrangeas that are in the Hydrangea Haven stamp set. And I used the one that is the full flower. And for the actual top of the flower, I used Misty Moonlight to stamp the background flower. And then on the top is Seaside Spray. And then for the leaves, I used Garden Green to do the outline. And then on the top, I used Old Olive. I cut that piece out with a corresponding die from the Hydrangea Dies collection. And that gave me the full flower. The reason I wanted to get that piece done was I wanted to know how large that flower would be on my focal point before I committed to putting a sentiment on the white piece. But I want you to think about a couple of things because there are so many ways that you can create this. You don't need to put a sentiment on the front. You could actually make your little bumper with a sentiment. And you don't need to finish designing your sentiment and your focal point before you attach whatever piece you're going to use to attach it to the base. But I just wanted to kind of talk through what I did. And then after I figured out where I wanted everything to be, I used a stamp from the most current stamp set that came with the paper pumpkin. And it's this pretty little cursive love. And I stamped that in Misty Moonlight to correspond with the color that I used for the hydrangea. So while you're thinking about your focal point, and you don't need to commit to it completely right now, I want to show you how to attach the base of the front to your card. And let me kind of show you the end result. If you look here, you're going to see a tab that is attached. It's a little hard to see because it's black on black, but I used a label die and part of it is on the front, part of it is on the base. And there's another one on the other side. So this process is really similar in many ways to the card that we made with the slider or the zipper when we had the card opening. We don't have a zipper here, but what we want to do is we want to attach that front piece so that it's free to move as the card is open. To do that, what I did is I went back to these nested dies and I used this die, which is very, very small, and I cut out two pieces of black cardstock in this shape. Don't get hung up about this shape. It doesn't matter what the shape is because it is going to be hidden behind this front piece. You could make circles, you can make squares, you can make rectangles. It really doesn't matter. But they need to be big enough that when you fold them in half, which is what you're going to do, and you don't have to get super technical with any kind of scoring board or anything like that. You're just going to fold them in half. They need to be substantial enough that whatever size you're using as the front piece, that there's going to be a little bit of area that they can attach to. All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm just taking those little pieces that I cut out with the die, and I'm just folding them in half. And what we're going to do is we're going to first attach them to the card. We're attaching them so that they will look like this. And if I hold this up, you'll see that we have pieces coming toward the front. It does not matter that you get this perfectly in the middle. Don't get hung up about that. If you're going to err on any side, my recommendation is that you err so that you have a little bit closer to the bottom than to the top. And that's only because the card could get a little top heavy. But just try and eyeball it. And again, it's not precision here that we're going for. So I'm going to take one of my little tabs and I'm going to put a little bit of glue on. If I can get this little guy to work, there we go. And just a little dab of glue. I'm going to hold it so obviously the glue is going down toward the card. And then I'm not going to get that all the way to the center. I am using that white cardstock edge as my guide. I'm trying to get that as close to the white cardstock edge as I can. And if it's not perfect, it's fine. And I'm just going to press that down and let that kind of hang out for a second. I'm going to turn this 180 degrees just because I work better with my right hand than my left. I'm going to take that other tab and put some glue on that. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try and use that same white line to get my second tab put on. And then I'm going to try, again, not going for perfection necessarily, but I'm going to try and get those two tabs lined up so that the top and the bottom of those tabs are horizontally the same. And I find green glue or Tombow works best for this rather than snail because I've got a couple of seconds to get this the way I want it. So this is good enough. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And here's what I'm ending up with. It kind of looks like a butterfly in a way. I'm going to make sure that I have my card right side up. So take 2 seconds to do that and just get your card right side up. And then you have some choices here. If you have your focal point pieces together, I do suggest that you put the entire front together before you put it on the top of the card. If you don't have everything together, don't worry about it. Just hang out for a second because you can finish that later. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put my front pieces together. I'm doing this because I tend to be able to get pieces lined up one on top of another if I don't have a lot of bulk underneath. Again, it's really not super critical because the design is going to be the wow factor. So I'm just layering my top piece. And I'm going to go ahead and add my hydrangea. And I thought this was kind of fun where it sort of goes off the side, but you can do anything you want to this. I do recommend that you don't make this top piece super thick. You know, maybe not ribbon, maybe not any kind of thick embellishments, because you're going to have some thickness on the inside of the card when you do your bumper. And the thicker you get it, the more likely it's going to be not difficult, but maybe a little challenging to actually get your card to close. So I've got my front piece done. And what I want to do now is I want to attach the front piece to those little pieces that the little tabs that we put onto the panels. And the way that I'm going to do that is I am going to add glue to my tabs. I'm not adding glue to the back of the panel. Always put the glue where you're going to put something, not on the piece that you're going to go to, because we do not want to get any glue outside these tabs. We want these to be able to move freely, and this piece to be able to move freely as well. Just want to give that a little bit of a burnish to get it to lie flat. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to attach this. And like I said, I'm going to put some glue on these tabs. And then I am going to do my best to put this in the center. And because the shape that I used is a point at the top and the bottom, I can see when that is sort of centered. And I'm just going to hold that for a few seconds and let the glue do its thing. And that focal point or piece is now attached to the front of the card. And when I open it up, it can take a little bit of maneuvering, but when I open this up, that piece is lying flat. So that's how we attach the front to the card. The last piece that we need to make on this card is the bumper, the stopper, the whatever you want to call it, that is going to prevent that card front from going all the way down when it's opened. And this is done in many different ways. And again, I want to talk through, you've got a ton of alternatives that you can use on this. I chose to make this more of a vertical, horizontal, rectangular piece, or a vertical rectangle. I wanted to give it a little bit of oomph. You can definitely make your bumper shorter. It doesn't need to be a straight edge over here. A circle, any shape is going to stop that piece from coming further out. It's completely up to you. But I highly recommend putting it onto dimensionals or making it thick enough with multiple layers of cardstock so that it is truly elevated on your card and it is not going to allow that piece to go beyond. You're going to notice that when this card is closed, that there is thickness on the inside because of that. And that's why I really don't recommend that you make the top really thick, because you could get into a little bit of a challenge to get this into an envelope. It will fit fine, but you could find yourself challenged. To do this bumper, I played around with some of the pieces that came with the Hydrangea Hill suite. And one of those pieces is this gorgeous acetate. It is a really cool set of paper. It is called Hydrangea Hill Mercury Glass Designer Acetate, and it comes in 12 by 12, and it's two-sided. There are two shades. One is a pink shade, and the other is this Highland Heather. The other is Rococo Rose. but also on the back of each is a silver. Now, acetate can be a little challenging to cut. It is much easier when you have a large piece and you can get the blade in your cutter to get on the edge and to have a long kind of landing strip to make that cut. When you get into pieces like this, it gets a little more challenging on the narrow end. So what I did when I was cutting these is I would put a strip into my trimmer and just pretend, I'm not going to do it, but pretend I wanted to cut this piece and it's narrow. So that blade doesn't have a lot of way to go. What I did is I took my blade and I positioned it so it was in the middle of the acetate. And I pushed that down and I just gave it a little bit of a movement to get a mark. And then I actually took my scissors and I cut that acetate where I wanted it to go. On the long side, it works fine, but when you've got these short pieces, you may find it's just a little bit easier to trim it however you want it to be. Then what I discovered when I was making these bumpers is that if you put acetate or this acetate on white paper, it kind of gets lost to me. I mean, it's pretty, but what I wanted to do is I really wanted to show off that background. So I decided I was going to put some black cardstock behind the acetate and really get it to pop. And on this one, I think I'm going to use the purple again, just because I think that's super pretty. So to make the bumper, what I did, and again, use your own dimensions, colors, shapes. But if you wanted to make one like I did, the acetate is 3/4 of an inch by 4. I cut it to 4 because I don't like to waste paper. And I knew that if I cut it to 4 inches, because that designer series acetate paper is 12 inches long, that I would be able to get 3 pieces out of it. And that's the only reason that I did that. Nothing else. And then I'm just putting some dots of glue because I really don't want to get a whole bunch of clumpy glue behind where the acetate is clear. I want it to just stick onto my black cardstock. And the black cardstock is the same size exactly of the acetate, just to give it a little bit of a shadow, which means that the black cardstock is 3/4 of an inch by 4. Then I wanted to do a frame around my bumper that was the same color combination in order as the frame that I did for the panels. So that meant that behind my acetate, I wanted white, and then behind the white, I wanted black. So the white for me is a little bit wider and longer than the pieces I use for the acetate. And I made that 7/8 of an inch by 4 1/8. And all I'm doing here is I'm just layering all this together. So I'm going to go ahead and put these pieces one on top of the other and just try and get it as centered as I can so that the same kind of border is all around. And after I add that to the white, I will add this now to the black piece just to give it a little bit more interest and depth. And then the next step is going to be adding the bumper to the card. And I did not get out any kind of ruler or any kind of measuring tool at all when I added this to the card. I simply decided that I wanted to have the card open to about that point, and I eyeballed that, which to me looks like about 1/4 of an inch. I really don't know exactly where it is. And again, I didn't measure or anything as far as how much I left at the bottom or at the top. But what I did use were dimensionals. And on these dimensionals, just like you would for anything where you want to make sure you don't have a place that is going to be void of having support underneath. I used quite a few dimensionals, but I also cut a couple in half and put them in areas where I wanted to make sure I had full coverage. And I've also found that if you have a combination of the mini dimensionals and the big dimensionals, that you can get into little corners pretty well. So that's also something that I've been using lately. Like I might have put a mini dimensional rather than cutting a big one in half if I had had those out. And obviously I'm just taking the wax paper off of here. And then I am simply going to eyeball this. And I'm eyeballing it where on the bottom side, I'm going to try and get it to be perpendicular to what I've already put down and try and get it about even top and bottom. And if you just let it go with dimensionals, you can still pick it up if it's not quite where you want it to be. And that's pretty close. And then I'm going to go ahead and just pat that down. And there I've got my bumper.
Cute, cute.
And then for the bling, I also pulled out, these are from the Hydrangea Hill Suite. These are the pastel pearls. And I decided that I also wanted an option, depending upon what color I had going on the top of the card. I pulled out some of the blue adhesive back gems. And you can see the difference. These are the blue adhesive back gems that went on the card with the blue hydrangea. And on the one that I had, the Highland Heather hydrangea, I used the pastel pearls and a couple of different shades on that card. So that is really the basic steps in making this kind of card. And while you're finishing and doing your cards, just think about some other things that you could do with this. As always, you can make this card design for any occasion. I think it would be super, super fun for a really nice birthday card. It could have sort of a present on the front with balloons or some cute little animals. And rather than a bumper that is a design, you can have a sentiment. You could put happy birthday. You can make this come in a little bit more and you could have a happy birthday sentiment there. Or if you've got a vertical, I know we've got vertical sentiments too that you can do. You can, like we've already talked about, you can put different shapes for your bumpers to come up with just different ways to dress this up. If you get really creative and daring, you can have a split bumper where you would have two pieces rather than one continuous one. And obviously the piece that goes on the front, this can be any shape, circles, squares, triangles. It could be the shape of a stamp that you've got a corresponding die to, or you can fussy cut it. Or again, if you get really daring, you could have two floating on the top. Maybe you could have a big butterfly on the top and a little butterfly on the bottom. and have 2 sets of tabs. A lot of different possibilities. One last thing that I want to leave you with, and then I will turn the camera back. This design has also given me some ideas of what to do with some of the paper pumpkin kits that we have. And in particular, I am going to use some of the pieces that we got in the latest kit. This is called Sending Hearts. It's the one from January. We got pre-printed card bases. Well, all I need to do is put a score down the middle of the front. And oh, look, I've already got something that would be super cute as a floating front on here. Or I could use the other card base that we received, score that down the middle. Oh, isn't that adorable? I could make that as a floating front. So, you know, as you look at different cards that you may already have, or if you have kits or anything else like that, you now have another design that you can use to really dress them up. And these are pretty quick. I think they're also stunning, and the possibilities are really endless. So next time, if I can figure this out, which I think I can, and I'm not trying to be obnoxious in saying that, I am going to show you a way that we're going to do multiple steps coming up, and it's going to be kind of cool. So we will do that. But that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and bring me back.